All right, this time it's typing on the late great comedian George Carlin. So it's something we were discussing on one of the World Socionics follow-up sessions on comedians and different types, and George Carlin was brought up, which I mentioned that I thought he could be an INTJ, um, or in proper socionics speak, an ILI. However, in fairness, I'm not sure. I got to be honest. I'm not sure. I think NTJ type, Gamma Quadra NTJ, an ILI, or an LIE. Either one of them, I think, are in play here. I honestly, it's really kind of hard to tell, and maybe some of you would like to help me with that. But I think we can definitely say he's Gamma and probably NT, and let's see why we can say that. So if you know George Carlin at all and his material and everything he's been around, he was a major public figure almost for going back to like the 1950s, 1960s, all the way into the about 2007, somewhere around there, maybe a little beyond that, 2008 actually. So they've been around a long time, big body of work, a lot of stuff. He is one of the all-time comedy greats, or is considered as such by most. But he had a very unique style of comedy, um, that some people like and some people don't like. And one of the styles, or one of the things that he did, was his clever usage of words, wordplay, a lot of witty style of humor that one could easily argue is very NT in its nature, and it's something he consistently did. So, for example, here he is, a while ago on C-SPAN, of all places, doing really some kind of a little press conference or a book tour.
Anxieties, I can assure you that I'm not here to advance any political, social, or environmental cause. I am, in fact, blessedly agenda-free. I don't want to save the river. I don't want to save the bay. I don't want to save the canyon, the whale, the wetlands, the rainforest, or the flying spotted dwarf something or other. I don't want to save the children above all, frankly. Frankly, I don't care about many of those things, and between you and me, those battles were lost a long time ago. I'm not interested in freeing someone, boycotting something, or preventing anything. I am interested in keeping my lunch inside my mouth if I can. And I don't want to make something optional. I refuse to wear ribbons of any color. You might say I'm just here to help define deviancy down. To be honest, there aren't many things I do believe in, but high among them would be friendship, family ties, and romantic love. I think those things can take you a long way. For the record, the only worthy cause I have devoted time to is a little-known place that does wonderful work, St. Anthony's Home for the Visually Unpleasant. It's run by the Little Sisters of the Heinous, and in fact, they operate a number of facilities: the Rochester Home for the Permanently Disheveled, the New England Haven for the Occasionally Coherent, and the Catholic Shelter for those who up until a year ago seemed to be doing just fine. Now, one of the things I wanted to do before I got too far along was to tell you a little more about myself in order to establish some common ground, create perhaps a more permissive environment. And so, with this in mind, and in the spirit of full disclosure, I would like to reveal to you my own remarkably tenuous connections to the press. More accurately, those of my family, and you can relax, none of these connections falls within the editorial area. So here we go.
So let me stop him there while he's rolling. Some things to keep in mind, like I said, very witty wordplay. He does a lot of comedy discussing society as a whole, a lot of commentary on society as a whole, much more broad sweeping kind of things, which I believe is more indicative of intuition. especially more of an NI. He's not really big on all these different possibilities and stuff. He's actually quite closed on many of his viewpoints, much of which is very dark sounding. It's a very dark style of humor that some people don't like, but it's quite closed and uh, you know, kind of fatalistic. That's the word I'm looking for. Very fatalistic. Okay, which sounds very NI-ish when you think about it. My little background in him. And by the way, I hope you noticed that he was wearing all black, something that in his later years, he wore a lot of all black constantly everywhere he went. Many of his HBO specials, he just shows up in very nondescript all black style attire, right? Which is not something he necessarily did in his younger years for different reasons. But let's give him a little bit more.
So that I can continue my work in government. Of course, no politician would admit to such a lowly station as working in government, serving the nation. I'm serving the nation. Another favorite distortion is public service. I'm in public service. I like America, don't you? The food is great, but the public service is terrible. Now, folks, a question for you. Do you think it's possible that one of these politicians, whose judgment is so poor that he honestly thinks of himself as serving the nation, might occasionally be expected to indulge in a little patriotism? Huh? What do you think? Well, of course, not only is it possible, it's inevitable, and that's when he's at his very best. That's when he trots out the really good stuff all across this great land of ours, the greatest nation on earth, the greatest nation in the history of the world. And in times of military crisis, you can be sure that someone in a suit in this town will eventually plant himself in front of a camera and carry on a great deal about the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. Now, normally during peacetime, the politicians will refer to people in the military as our young men and women stationed around the world. But in wartime, they quickly become our brave young fighting men and women stationed halfway around the world in places whose names they can't pronounce, wondering if they'll ever see their loved ones again. For added emotional impact, sons and daughters can always be substituted for men and women. And so I think we can sum this up by saying that where the military is concerned, the extent of a politician's insincerity can be measured by how far around the world our soldiers are stationed and whether or not any of them can pronounce it. Incidentally, another way of expressing this sentiment is to say we're sending our young men and women to places the average American can't find on a map. I've always thought it was kind of funny and somewhat out of character for a politician to go out of his way to point out the low level of American intelligence when indeed his very job depends upon it. It would seem to fly in the face of that other rhetorical standby of theirs. The American people are a lot smarter than they're given credit for. This is said with a straight face, although it is obvious, of course, that the proposition is being stated precisely backwards. But the politicians, God bless them, or something like that, they're at their most entertaining when they're in trouble. When they're in trouble, their explanations usually begin simply with words like miscommunication. What did you do wrong, Senator? Well, it was a miscommunication. Or I was quoted out of context. Better yet, and more ironic, they twisted my words. Such a nice touch. A person who routinely spends his days torturing the language complains, they twisted my words. Then, as the controversy continues to heat up, he moves to his next level of complaint. The whole thing has been blown out of proportion. It's always the whole thing. Apparently, no one has ever claimed that only a small portion of something was blown out of proportion. Has to be the whole thing. That's because now he's feeling the heat. And so, as time passes and more evidence comes in, he suddenly changes directions and tells us, we're trying to get to the bottom of this. Now he's on the side of law and order. It's jujitsu, really. We're trying to get to the bottom of this so we can get the facts out to the American people. That's always a nice touch, American people. In fact, at this point, he might even say, I'm willing to trust in the fairness of the American people. Clearly, he's preparing us for something. And so, when finally all the facts come out and our subject seems quite guilty, he employs that sublime use of the passive voice, Mistakes were made. Mistakes were made. Don't look at me. Probably someone in my office. Things are moving faster now. Mistakes were made is rapidly overtaken by there is no evidence. No one has proven anything. Eventually, I will be exonerated. I have faith in the American judicial system and that certain sign that things are closing in. Whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty? Whatever happened? Well, he's about to find out. We know this must.
All right, so Carlin is known for that. It's very witty. It's very wordplay. It's stringing these kind of very intellectual like concepts together. That's his style of humor. Really, always has been from the start. His probably one of his most famous work is the 7 words you cannot use on TV, which I won't even bother saying them, but you can look him up on that. So his wordplay stuff, which is very NT-ish stuff. Typically, NTs tend to love to play with words and just get into this kind of rapport and just enjoying to mess with the root of the word and what that means and what it doesn't mean and why would we bother if this means like that's very NT-ish stuff, right? So a little background on him. Yes, I know it's Wikipedia, so what could go wrong? But it's good enough in this case, I think. All right. So born back in 1937. He died in 2008. Yep, there it is. Okay. So grew up kind of an Irish immigrant to very Irish parents back in New York, so on. Did a lot of time doing some theater stuff and so on. Was in the U.S. Air Force for a little while, where he was actually where he was labeled as an unproductive airman by his superiors, given a general discharge, and court-martialed 3 times. He got kicked out of school at one point, so he was a bit of a rebel when he was young. No surprise there. Now, some interesting pieces for type here. He eventually in the 60s goes off. He starts kind of performing. He gets together with a friend of his that was named Jack Burns. Yep, Jack Burns here, another fellow DJ, radio guy, and they start doing comedy skits together for a couple of years, do pretty well, but eventually, after 2 years together as a team, they parted to pursue individual careers, but remained the best of friends. So, best of friends there. Nice, okay. There's also him marrying his first wife. Whatever, let's do it over here. He was married twice throughout his life, and his first wife, Brenda Hosbrook, that he had here, he married her back in 1961 and was married to her until 1997. Right? So, wow. Quite a long time, and that's when she died, really, of cancer. And then shortly after that, he met another woman about 6 months later, and he married her that he was with for about 10 years, or nearly 10 years, up until his death. So you could say his FI is also pretty good. Pretty good. I don't recall him ever being labeled as a difficult person to work with or deal with or any of those things. He was actually pretty loyal sounding to his friends in his relationship and all that. I am looking for, yeah, here we go. Personal life. While touring with his comedy partner Burns, Carlin met Brenda Hosbrook. They were married at her parents' home in Dayton, June 3rd, 1961. So kind of an intimate thing. It wasn't a grand affair. Married at the home. Okay. Couple's only child was Kelly Marie Carlin. Okay. They renewed their wedding vows in Vegas in 1971. So about 10 years later. His wife, Hosbrook, died of liver cancer in 1997, a day before Carlin's 60th birthday. 6 months later, he met comedy writer Sally Wade and later described it as love at first sight, but admitted that he was hesitant to act on his feelings as soon as so soon after his wife's death. He eventually did marry her, though, and was with her for about 10 years. So it's interesting that he admitted he was hesitant to get with her. Okay. Um, it's not concrete, but it is suggestive this is not somebody who maybe is very SE or just another type that is very quick to move on, right? So showing a lot of FI. He doesn't move quite as quickly, but when he commits, he commits. Okay. He stayed married for 30 plus years, and then he was married again for nearly 10 years. Loyal to his friends and so on. I never heard of his really being a problem with anybody or having issues in his personal life like that. Um, so we could say his FI is also pretty good. Another good piece, indicative of likely NI stuff. Right here. Okay, it was right here. Aha. Okay, aha. In the late 1960s, Carlin was making about $250,000 annually. Bear in mind, that's 1960s money, 250,000 annually. He's making $250,000 in late 1960s. That is a lot, right? Over time, Carlin changed his routines and his appearance. He grew his hair long, sported a beard and earnings, and typically dressed in t-shirts and blue jeans. He lost some TV bookings by dressing strangely for a comedian at a time when clean-cut, well-dressed comedians were the norm. He hired talent managers Jeff Wald and Ron de Blasio to help him change his image, making him look more hip for a younger audience. Wald put Carlin into much smaller clubs such as the Troubadour in West Hollywood and the Bitter End in New York City, and later said that Carlin's income was thus reduced by 90%, but his later career arc was greatly improved. Okay, that's important. And the reason that's important is because it kind of shows very forward thinking, very NI, looking to the future, planning ahead, long ahead. He was making $250,000 back in the 60s, which is a ton of money. He was comfortable. He could have just stayed right there doing what he was doing, nice and comfortable. Maybe his career fizzles out a decade later or so, whatever. But no, he was obviously looking ahead, going, I need to make my material relevant to the younger generations, to the future. I need to look to the future generations, and I need to market myself to them. I need to do that. So he changed up his image, got some new talent managers. They kind of put him in different places, and he took a hit financially for it, but knowing that it would pay off for him in the long run. And he's had one of the longest standing comedy careers of anybody, going all the way from the 60s to the late 2000s, when he finally died. So it's really being able to look ahead quite well, willing to take the hit for the greater investment down the road. And again, very suggestive of NI usage going on here, high NI usage. Okay, so to put that in there. Now, we've kind of established that NT is likely, NI usage seems high, FI seems to be pretty good. It's not terrible, as best we can tell anyway. And we're kind of like, could he be a gamma?
Poisoning the atmosphere, overfishing the oceans, polluting the rivers and lakes, destroying.
So his humor is, needless to say, very gamma, especially as he got older. But he was always quite of a rebel, kind of a pain in a lot of ways. And just a quick snapshot of that.
Now, man has done everything he can to destroy, defile, and interfere with nature. Clear-cutting forests, strip mining mountains, poisoning the atmosphere, overfishing the oceans, polluting the rivers and lakes, destroying wetlands and aquifers. So when nature strikes back and smacks man in the head and kicks him in the nuts, I enjoy that. I have absolutely no sympathy for human beings whatsoever. None. And no matter what kind of problem humans are facing, whether it's natural or man-made, I always hope it gets worse. Don't you? Don't you?
Don't you have a part of you that secretly hopes everything gets worse? When you see a big fire on TV, don't you hope it spreads? Don't you hope it gets completely out of control and burns down 6 counties? You don't root for the firemen, do you? I mean, I don't want them to get hurt or nothing, but I don't want them putting out my fire. That's my fire. That's nature showing off and having fun. I like fires. You know something else I like? Those spring floods in the Midwest. Aren't they great? Like clockwork. Spring floods in the Midwest. But I'm starting to catch on that every year it's the same story. Another flood in the same place with the same people on the same river. Same fucking people. And these people do not move. They will not fucking move. They repaint, put down new carpeting and wallpaper, and they move right back into the same fucking house on the floodplain next to the river. And then they wonder why grandma's floating downstream with the parakeet on her head. Fourth time. Again. Fourth.
All right. So, and if you look at any of his stand-up specials, you look at a lot of stuff he goes into, it's very dark. It's a massive criticism on people, society. He loves to destroy religion. He has something titled "Life is Worth Losing." Very dark stuff. So I think you can very safely kind of say he is Gamma Quadra. You can lean into probably being an NT, given the word usage, the wordplay, the exposition on society, his viewpoints, and a more generalized global way of people. He's not really attacking a specific person. He's not really, almost rarely does that. But he hits more groups of people. Like you saw before, he was talking more about politicians and Washington, D.C. overall in a kind of a general broad sense. I mentioned before him thinking ahead very proactively about his career in the long run, demonstrating good NI as well. So I think it's fairly comfortable to lean into him being a Gamma NT, and that he would value FI. Now, the question becomes, is he an ILI or is he an ILE? Really hard to say, and I really can't honestly narrow that down. Can't do it. It's just hard to find any useful information that really cements that thing. You'd be tempted to lean more into LIE simply because of the fact that he does show pretty good energy, good pop. He was able to sort of morph into whatever he sort of needed to be, depending on the time period, the era that he was in. If you watch him on interviews, he does a pretty good job being quick on his feet and spontaneous on interviews. He doesn't quite show the sort of slower, more low energy kind of approach that you might expect from an ILI. So it kind of makes you lean more like LIE maybe might be a little bit more on the extroverted side. But again, it's not quite clear. But I think for now we can safely conclude that he is very likely a Gamma NT. And I guess for now, that's where we're going to have to stay with him until we can dig up a little bit better evidence otherwise. But by all means, let me know what you think. Let me know what you feel, what you think. Were you a Carlin fan? Do you know who he is? Do you think he's something else? Some in maybe MBTI circles thought him as an ENTP. I think you can easily debunk that. He's got to be a Gamma. So, as always, like, comment, subscribe. Feel free to reach out for me if you want a typing session or if you want a second opinion on it. I'll be here until the next one.